The category is What the Trans, Darling?
Hello, and welcome to What the Trans? What the Trans? What the Trans indeed, me pretending to be Ashley, and I know what you are thinking, Ashley. Why am I pretending to be you? Well, it's because you're not here, Ashley, because this is a very, very special episode of this podcast thing that we make, and it will take some explaining. Recently, we messed around with our Patreon rewards, and through that messing around, we have created a whole new monthly show called What the Trans Nights. Basically, this show is me and Ashley chilling out after a long day of looking at the news and crunching it down and just talking about whatever the hell we like. Our Patreon backers who subscribe to the time-travelling producer tier will be able to get these episodes 6 months before everyone else. But today, everyone will be able to enjoy episode 1 of What the Trans Nights right here. Next week, we'll return to our usual format with some terrible news and some informational meat. But for now, today, please enjoy a taste of our new show, What the Trans Nights. And stick around afterwards because we've got some information about the census that you need to know. They're going to count us. They're going to count trans people. Admittedly through some optional questions, but they are going to count us, so we will actually have an idea of how many of us there are. It's very important, so stick around for that. But until then, please enjoy this taste of What the Trans Nights.
The category is What the Trans, Darling?
Well, hello, and you're listening to WTTN, What the Trans
Nights.
I
didn't say it quite right then, did I?
Oh, it's fine. As you might be able to tell, this is a slightly different form of What the Trans. Potentially, maybe, hopefully, your favourite trans podcast. Although we would understand if it's not. Anyway, this is intended... this is intended to be a nice little treat for some of our patrons. This is going to be released early to those backers and will be coming out some months down the line for everybody else. So this is not content that we're keeping gated away. It is going to come out eventually, but you lucky patrons, you get a sneaky peek. And what we'll be doing with these What the Trans Nights is not talking about the news. We may talk about issues, we may talk about ourselves, we may tell jokes, we may get silly, we may get bawdy. But what we will not be doing is hyper-focusing on all of the terrible things that we encounter in the world as trans people.
Yeah, just imagine this is what me and Ashley do once we have closed down our various news machinery and we have sat back with a couple of drinks like whiskey but aren't whiskey because I think whiskey tastes gross. I have the taste of a 9-year-old when it comes to liquids.
I'm just going to not really comment on that one.
So just imagine us, we're sat back in some much nicer chairs than we are, in like a library, I want to say. There's
definitely
cigar smoke around, which is not being produced by me because I think cigars are just as gross as whiskey. Basically, I wasn't built to own a newspaper in the 1950s, is what I'm saying. So just imagine this is us, just sit back, relaxing,
and occasionally
talking about all of the racy shit that doesn't get into the main show.
And occasionally a lackey comes up to us and we demand pictures of Spider-Man. I think I peaked.
Well, Jonah Jameson's now doing like an Alex Jones style blog in the comics, from what I've heard.
So we're just going to have a tangent here. Welcome to What the Trans Nights. But yes, on the most recent Spider-Man game, not the Miles Morales one, the one that came out a few years ago, I want to say 2017, which I played through and thoroughly enjoyed. And yes, indeed, J. Jonah Jameson is absolutely running an Alex Jones flavoured podcast. And so they've done some recordings of a guy doing that, and it's hilarious.
Maybe we should start doing more like InfoWars style content. We actually have an audience of people who would be interested in testosterone products. So, like, we could just phone up all the people that advertise on his shitty shows and steal all of his ad revenue and stuff. Like, we don't do adverts. We've turned down advertisers before.
We have.
But I think if we're going to embrace our new vision, because this is happening now, this is the plan now.
Yeah.
Our vision for the future of what they're trying to become, like InfoWars. We need to be kind of awful.
do not agree with this direction of travel. I feel
we'll have to talk about this on our next production meeting.
Definitely.
Which this is not it. This is nights. We're off the clock.
We are off the clock, and welcome to the show. And so we're gonna talk to each other a little bit about that was the year that was. As we record this, it has just turned 2021, and 2020 was quite the year, but we thought we'd keep it away from all the specifically topical stuff and look at on all the stuff which we might say is perennial. So in these little episodes, we're going to be looking at a few different subjects, like are the cis okay? And perhaps slightly less well-known trans stereotypes, perhaps. That one might be funny. But today, we're going to have as light and cheerful a time as possible while talking about coming out. Yeah, it's a coming out episode.
Specifically, how fucking weird it can be. Because there's been a number of high-profile comings out of late. Jim Sterling came out as gender trash, which is now my favourite phrase ever.
Mine too.
Elliot Page came out as transmasculine. Abigail Thorne from Philosophy Tube came out as a trans woman. Like, it's... Coming out is happening all over the place with people that you may have heard of. And that sort of got us thinking, how weird is coming out? Ashley, I'm going to present the question to you. How fucking weird is coming out as an activity?
Well, speaking as the, being fully paid by George Soros member of the leftist Antifa culture warriors who are taking over the world. I'm kidding. I don't know. I just strung words together then.
It's okay. Lots of people think that we are directly funded by George Soros. Like, I don't know if I've told you about this, but during lockdown 1 in 2020, about once a week, I got a tweet from somebody saying, "Oh, you're paid up by Soros to induct kids and promote blockers," and I'm just like, well. You don't know anything about what we do or what we actually are, if that's what you think, but have at it. Go for it. I think that is a sign of success when you get roped into an anti-Semitic conspiracy theory like that. Like, I think that's a sign that you've made it.
I guess kind of partially, but that is fascinating because honestly, I wish it was true. I would sell the fuck out if George Soros offered me money.
You know what I started doing? And people have like come up to like the trans Twitter or something and say, "Oh, you are part of some big cabal, or you are part of some anti-Semitic conspiracy theory that is really horrible, and you should stop doing that." I've just started sending them pictures of my desk.
Okay.
Because my desk is all the proof you need to know exactly what the trans is. I mean, for a full picture, you'd need at least 4 or 5 different desks in bedrooms at this point. But I only had access to my one. And it was like covered in Maltesers and empty cans of Fanta and just garbage. And my monitor that I'm looking at right now while we record is kept up on bits of wood and books because the monitor I got for free on Gumtree a long time ago and the stand was broken.
Impressive.
That's where everything I do for what the trans happens at this desk I'm sat at. So I've just started sending people a picture of it, just be like, does this look like a well-organised lobby?
It's a funny one, isn't it? I mean, so speaking of desks, and just while we're here, obviously we haven't made any recordings for What the Trans in a little while, so obviously when I was ensconcing myself into my recording setup, I had to clear all of the sex toys and whips off of my desk and then get my microphone out and, all that sort of thing. So, no, legit though, I'm not kidding. That's where I keep all the kinky shit. So I'm not sending anybody a photograph of that. But yes, coming out, which can be a fun one. And so what I was going to say actually was, in a sense, as a trans person, there's a school of thought where you never really stop coming out. Because in some cases, obviously, you may be identifiably trans. I mean, I tend to think that I am, although I am occasionally confused by people not reading me in that way. Confused and delighted, I might say. But the actual, the process of coming out, it doesn't just happen once. You do tend to have to come out in sort of different spaces, in a sense. And, okay, I'll give you an example. So, recently I've been having some medical fun and games, and I went for a scan, right? An MRI scan. And so the technician / doctor, actually, I'm not sure, asked me, "Are you pregnant?" And I started saying, And then in my head, in the space of a couple of seconds, it splashed through, okay, do I tell this guy? Is that going to be a problem? Is it going to be, he's not going to react badly, obviously, because I'm sure he's met trans people before he works in a hospital, but oh my God, what do I say? And so what ended up coming out of my mouth was, no. And I didn't say, no, I'm trans, or I didn't sort of say, oh, I'm trans, that won't be an issue. I just went, no. Because I couldn't be bothered providing the explanation for the millionth time,
So that is what you would call a situational coming out, I'd imagine.
Indeed.
It's one where you're just like, oh, I now have to have this conversation again. And there's more on the line in that kind of situation because your healthcare and treatment may be affected by it.
Yeah, indeed. And it doesn't necessarily seem likely that would happen, but you do hear stories of that happening. Perhaps not very often, but, we've all known somebody as trans people, I'm sure, or indeed experienced shockingly poor, if not discriminatory healthcare for ourselves. And so and it's not just, where you're in situations like that in healthcare, you can come across stuff like that in employment, and other things that you do in your life where you might have to kind of let people know if there's about to be a change. But the main sort of coming out, and the one that people fix on when we talk, and when we're doing National Coming Out Day and whatever else, that tends to be coming out to one's nearest and dearest, one's family, friends, parents and spouses.
And when it comes to that, I have a series of examples of what not to do.
Oh, yes, well.
Based on a particular trans woman who may be on this call who isn't called Ashley.
Okay, I'm not quite sure who you mean, but it's on the tip of my mind.
I came out to 90% of my friends on a Facebook post back in 2012 because I was drunk and was like, well, the coming out to the few people I have has gone okay. Why don't I try this? It is important if you are one of our listeners who has not come out to anyone yet. Don't do that. Because it only confuses everyone. Because there's only so much you could put into a Facebook post about your situation.
True.
To answer all of the questions that will come up in their heads, and then you will be inundated with something like 70 Facebook messages.
Wow, man.
Being like, wait, does this mean that you don't want a dick anymore? What does this mean?
Oy, yeah. Well, there are always the questions after you come out, but perhaps we'll come back to...
And I didn't have all the information when I first came out. I first came out saying I was a transvestite because I thought that's what the word was.
Right. Ouch.
I didn't even know what the fucking words were for at least the first 2 years I was out. But this was back in the days before the tipping point, which our younger listeners won't believe this, but there was a time where it wasn't easy to get information about trans issues. And in 2012, when I was coming out, that was definitely one of those times because I was relying entirely on message boards, which some of you won't even know what they fucking are these days because nobody uses them, and going on to places like Angels and stuff, which was just full of other trans people. There was no authority, really, that I could find or even would have known how to find to get that kind of information. So my coming out was very much making up as I was going along, using coming out guides for gay people.
I see.
And then ignoring it all and getting drunk and coming out all at once on Facebook.
Indeed. Well,
Which don't do that.
Well, I don't know. So you see, the thing is, I see why you say don't do that, because it perhaps didn't work out optimally for you. But I've actually known a few people who have very publicly come out on Facebook, and they've either done that by creating a new profile and sending an invite to everybody that they know kind of thing, or they've just changed the name of their extant profile to the new name and updated the photo and stuff. And it has gone well. And so I think that can depend on your friends group. And that's definitely going to be something that you yourself, if you yourself are the person who is coming out, only the person who's actually got the thing to tell can make a decision like that about how to do it. And I see what you're saying about how, don't put it on Facebook because it's all big and confusing. And in fairness, I would say that when I put it on Facebook, I did it in the most kind of oblique and needlessly complicated way possible, which... I
would like to amend my advice. Don't come out on Facebook in 2012.
That's exactly it. And so it was the same year for me. So it was 2012 and obviously I'd known for a long time. I was in my late 20s. I think it was 28, or I'd possibly just turned 29. And I'd known for ages. And so I ended up just kind of snapping at one point a little bit and did the deed poll form and, sorted all of that out in November, which is the same month as my birthday, as a little treat for myself. And then was like, well, heck, I guess I better explain some things to my family. Because although I had come out to them, and I'd actually come out a couple of times, in fact, because when I was like 19, I said, look, I'm bi, and I occasionally express myself in an extremely ladylike fashion. You may need to brace yourself for the idea that I will transition. And obviously some years later, that's exactly what I did do that. And it was kind of like I had to come out again, you know?
Yeah.
But it was... I kind of hope Mum and Dad aren't listening to this one, but there was a certain amount of pushback, resistance, like, oh, are you sure? And all that. And I'm sure we've all experienced that when we're coming out in various ways to friends and relatives.
Did you have anyone who forgot that you'd come out to them?
No, I didn't.
Because I did.
Wow.
This is a very, very clunky way for me to come in and be like, I want to tell my story by asking you a specific question.
Do it. Oh, you have? Right, carry on.
Yeah, I just did that. But yeah, it was on a night out. I did a lot of my coming out drunk. Now I'm starting to realise that that's how I came out, was mostly drunk during that time. But I was very drunk with a very drunk friend of mine, and I came out to him.
Okay.
And he was like, oh, okay, cool. And I was surprised at how well it had gone.
Okay.
The next day, I messaged him just to be like, hey, are you okay? Because I was a little bit nervous, just like, oh, okay. It might have settled now, and things might be a bit weird, so I better send him a message and make sure it's okay. And he was like... So I was just like, hey, about what we talked about last night, are we cool? And he was like, oh, yeah, we're totally cool. Like, I mean, I don't know why I wouldn't be cool about stuff about your job. I was like, no, not the job stuff. Like, me being trans. He was like, what? I don't remember that conversation. And I'm like, of all the conversations to remember, you remember the one about how I had like a few like shitty issues with a dickhead at work, but you forgot the coming out part? That was the part you blacked out?
Yeah. Well done, man. Thanks.
Yeah, I came out again.
Yeah.
Over Facebook Messenger. And now thinking back, that might have influenced my decision to come out on Facebook.
That's a fair point.
It was about 8 years ago, so I can't remember the specific timeline, but I think
it's just
me coming out on Facebook happened very shortly after that.
So much of modern life is, the social media plays such a big part in it now. And obviously, I'm sure we've all got, we all feel about that differently, or perhaps not, but like I've also known some trans people who have kind of, done some groundwork, like, occasionally put a picture of themselves up wearing makeup and see what the reaction is and stuff like that. But so I didn't have a friend who completely forgot about it, but I did have a friend who kind of kicked me into it in a sense. So this old friend of mine went to uni together and, ended up living in Manchester together. And then she, was leaving the country. She was going to go and work overseas. And so, but before she did that, we were round at, and, showing my location now, but we were at Napoleon's in Manchester, which is the trans bar, which is not always the greatest and most salubrious of places, but it was there while I was coming out, and there were a lot of other trans people there, and that was genuinely quite valuable. So, say what you will about Napoleon's, people do make connections in there. So I was there with my friend, and I was there on Femme, but before I'd officially changed my name and come out and stuff, and I was like, I'm going to do it, I think I want to transition because I too was drunk. And she was like, no, you don't. What? No, you wouldn't. You don't want to do it. Why not? What do you mean? Because if you did, then you would have done it by now. And that has stayed with me because that was the thing that was a catalyst. And so I've spoken to my friend subsequently, and she's been like, oh my God, I can't believe I said that to you. That's so rude. I'm so sorry. But I was like, no. I needed somebody to say that.
We've talked before about how our comings out have been kind of on the same track year-wise, but it sounds like there was a difference there because you were talking to some people about it who knew about what being trans was. I didn't have that. I didn't know any trans people until about 2 years after I came out.
I see.
So what was that like having trans people around from the day one?
Well, I think, so to say that there were trans people there in Napoleon's who, we'd occasionally talk to each other when we were going out getting drunk, I wouldn't say that I actually was close friends with any trans people at the time I came out. So I knew a couple of them from years past, but I'd never kind of gotten up the courage to ask, although I kind of did with one of them many years before. So it was but I was connected to a community. I'm not going to say I wasn't, because I absolutely was, because that was about the time when there was like a trans group. And so when I decided that I was going to do the thing, I got myself all dressed up and went to the trans group, which was in the LGBT Foundation's building in Manchester. And it's, there were a number of other older women and a couple of slightly creepy older women, really. There was one of them who just come up and stand like really close to you, very much in your personal space, and ask you about what you plan to do with your genitals. And that's like, okay, that's really creepy. I am not going to this group again. But because most of my friends were LGBT, and, a couple of them in particular said, oh, well, my housemate used to be trans, or so I know a bit about it. And, so yeah, kind of no problem sort of thing. So because I was in a little queer bubble, it was kind of fine to come out. And then as I did that, another friend of mine that I'd kind of added to the bubble also then came out, as trans. So we were kind of each other's transition buddy for a bit, but we did not always get on. And that was, that was a slightly fractious relationship at times. So, but you're right. I think just having that queer social safety net around myself was so valuable. And that's really, particularly at the moment, because as we're recording this, no idea what it's like as you're listening to this, but as we're recording this, we are still in lockdown as a result of the coronavirus pandemic. So it's quite difficult for people to get together, but then at the same time, I would encourage people to cultivate their queer little chosen families, because honestly, that's what gave me the strength and the focus to be able to come out.
Yeah, it's a very, very different story for me. I didn't even know what the words were or even where to look. I didn't even think that what I was in the LGBT, at all. I remember after I came out discovering that I was part of, the LGBT community and just wait, really?
That's me?
But what? That's me now? Wait, am I? I didn't really put that much thought into, a lot of things because I didn't know to think of them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It isn't like it is now. I'm definitely showing my age here, but it's not like it is now where I'm sure that information was out there, just I didn't think to look at LGBT stuff.
I see. Yeah.
I didn't really think about what the T stood for. So I sort of was in my little cis straight world, surrounded by cis straight people. I knew a bunch of gay people from my hometown, from uni and stuff, but I didn't really meet that many in London or become friends with them. All of my friends were very straight and very cis, and I came at it as someone who was totally fucking clueless. And I made the decision to come out, and this is going to sound dramatic because it kind of is. But I made the decision to come out on the night of the opening ceremony of the 2012 Olympics.
Yeah.
When I had just been on what was going to be my last ever date with a woman. And this was before I would spend 3 months trying to be a gay man, all the way through the summer, all the way through the Olympics, of making out with all sorts of guys. But before that, I sort of came to the conclusion I had to come out as something.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. While I was watching Paul McCartney do Hey Jude, after the date had been a disaster, a total fucking disaster, because we sat down in the Spice of Life in London, in a bar right next to the theatre that has the Harry Potter thing on now. Great bar. It's the only bar in central London I know where you actually have room to fucking breathe. But I was there with this girl, and she had asked me if I wanted to have a blowjob in the toilets.
Right.
And I was a straight woman at the time, although I wasn't entirely aware of what that was or what that meant. The idea of having a blowjob from anyone wasn't particularly something I truly wanted.
Yeah.
So I said, no, thank you. And so she burst into tears because she read that as me not finding her attractive. Which, on the surface was kind of true, but not in the way she was taking it.
But then how was she to know that? This stuff is quite hard to navigate, isn't it? So...
Yeah, I didn't know. So how the fuck was she going to know? So I was just there no, it's not about that because you're a beautiful woman. And she was absolutely beautiful and really cool in all sorts of ways. Just it was never going to happen. And I ended that night. Well, I didn't end that night then. I ended that encounter when she ran off crying. And I sort of ran after her to be all no, wait, please. And then I realised, I'm chasing a woman around central London right now. That's not good. I'm just going to leave that and I'm going to go and get very drunk. And so, like 6-7 hours later, I was off my face, don't know which bar I was in Soho, but I was surrounded by loads of gay people singing along to Hey Jude at the end of the opening ceremony. And I was there just like, I got to come out. I got to do something about this. So I started off from that point until about September. So that was July, August, September. So I spent 2 months trying to live as a gay man. Because I was like, okay, you like guys. It's time to really come to terms with that, because there have been times at uni and stuff where one night when I was really drunk, I'd be like, I really want to go and fuck a guy. But then I never knew how to make that happen. But then at that time, I was just like, I've got to accept that. That's what I am. That's what this is all about. I'm going to go off and try and make out with loads of guys. And I did for 2 months. But there was always a moment in those times where their hands would go places. And my brain would just be like, no, that body part shouldn't be there. That body part is wrong. And other people getting involved in that particular area? No. The alarm bell was ringing. So that's when I looked over and was like, oh, I'm just going to come out as a transvestite woman. That's how I used to think of it and say it. Transvestite woman.
Honey. Oh, well, I mean...
Yeah. So this is a good case study of how someone who would come out when they have no fucking idea what even being trans is, to an extent. Like, I knew I was trans. I just didn't have the framework to understand it.
That's a mood, I think. I think that's very relatable. I think, although, when I sort of tell my coming out story, it's kind of like I did put a certain amount of thought into it, but then there were also points where I absolutely didn't and, phrased it badly and stuff. But then I think, you, as you said during your story, you came out again, which kind of chimed with certain experiences that I've had with, people that I've had to try and gently convince more than once that I speak the truth and I'm not making it up, kind of thing.
Oh, when they don't believe you.
Yes. Oh, no, don't be daft. Yeah, it was like, because, and I'd kind of gone in a particular direction here. I'll give you a bit of insight into Egg Ashley here. I was still in a band, but I was doing the whole, I've got a beard and long hair thing. It was a trimmed little goatee, but
so
I was
many
trying.
Trans women go for the long hair and stuff and the beard in bands. So many.
Basically. And I'm sure I've mentioned this on the main podcast before, looking at all the music that I listen to and all the punk musicians and the metal musicians and all the people that I enjoy the work of, and they're all wearing lots of eyeliner. And it's like, I can't even tell if that person is, I can't tell what gender that person is. And I'm so fascinated by that concept. What's that about? Young Ashley. So you kind of put information together as you're going along, and it can be very, very difficult to do, particularly if you don't have easy access to that information. Obviously, the internet has been a tremendous boon. We've been able to organise and do stuff in a way that we haven't before. It gives you access to a lot of information that you would have had to go hunting around probably fairly skeevy bookshops to find before, unless you lived somewhere that had a specifically LGBT bookshop like Gaze the Word, which London,
I had.
Yes.
It was all here. Everything I needed was here.
Yep.
I just didn't think to look in the particular areas I should have done. And 2 years later, I discovered Gaze the Word and walked in and was just like, okay. This, if I knew that this existed, this place may have been able to help.
Potentially. But then, books are expensive. But then it's another way, it's a way to find a social network, isn't it? Like a reading club or a D&D club. Because I know some of you of our lovely listeners are going to be in a D&D group or, any one of a number of other role-play games, because that's what we all do. And that just reminds me actually about something about coming out, which is like a meme that I saw is like, if you're playing a game of Dungeons and Dragons and one of your party members isn't using their character to work through some gender stuff, then one of you will be chosen. And I really liked that. I was like, yeah, that kind of works. Because again, in the people that I've met since I've moved to Manchester, there are so many coming out stories of kind of trying things out in a role-play game setting or in an artistic setting. Say, people who are drag performers who, they start that process as gay cis men and come out of it as like, well, actually, I think I was drawn towards this because I am not cis. And there's so many different ways for people to come out, and honestly, they are all valid, and it does take some time to get around to being where you really want to be.
But it is fucking weird at times. That is a thing.
It can be very, very strange. It certainly can be strange.
I'm still coming out to this day. I came out to a delivery person the other day.
Right.
That was interesting.
Impressive.
Because I changed my wardrobe up considerably last year, and it's now at the point where basically I am wearing clothes types that you don't find in the men's section.
Indeed.
You know, I'm rocking a lot of dresses and skirts these days.
Oh,
and
yeah.
so that means that and that adds another element to things because I have had to come out more since I changed my wardrobe up. And this is one of those times where this was somebody that I had been taking deliveries off for about 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
And I answered the door, mask on, distanced, all of the stuff that we have to do at time of recording. But I was wearing, nothing particularly flashy. It was like a long sleeve t-shirt and denim maxi skirt, and nothing particularly, sexy or anything. But he looked up and down just like, wait, what? And I was like, oh, I'm a trans woman. And he was like, oh, what does that mean? And I was like, oh, old money, like transsexual. And he was like, oh, okay. And he looked at me. Then he walked away. Usually there would be some coming and going and stuff. Some hello, how's it going? Oh, the weather, blah, blah, blah. That didn't happen that time. And I don't know what the hell's going to happen next. I'm sure this is an experience that everyone listening at some point has had, I think. Very
much so, yes. I had a slightly similar experience when I was on the phone to the NHS this week, speaking to somebody else who, in a different department I've not dealt with before. Although, in fairness, the way she phrased the question was very nice. But, once again, I had to kind of out myself. And it can be very taxing because sometimes it's like you kind of feel like you have to repress yourself and not mention stuff just to get through and have an easier conversation. But coming out is, it's an ongoing process, and it's not something you don't have to come out and say, oh, I'm this and I'm going to be this forever. It's a process. It goes on. And so if you have come out as something, but maybe you think it's not the right thing, or if you know you're going to need to come out at some point soon, then, support and information is available and you are valid. Whoever you are and whatever you need to come out as, it is you. It is your truth. It's valid and nobody can take it away from you. And we, Michelle and myself, wish you the absolute best in your jolly little journey. And I think that's a good place to draw it to a close. What do you say, Michelle?
Yeah, if you, listener person, have any weird stories to share or any insights into coming out, please do let us know on all of the various things you can tell us things on, like Twitter /whatthetrans, Facebook /whatthetrans, Instagram /whatthetrans, and through our website whatthetrans.com. Found a way to link to all of those things in the description in one thing.
Yeah.
That won't be of very much interest to Ashley because I tend to fill in the metadata on the final upload, so this only affects me, but it makes things so much easier. So yeah, go down into the description and click on the link tree, and you can find all the different ways to send us things or know we exist online.
Definitely. And we will be back with some mainline news-flavoured episodes very soon. We will be doing a few more of these What the Trans Nights episodes as well, keeping it a little bit more lighthearted, trying to keep ourselves from despair. And until then, until we next speak to you, stay safe, stay warm, and we wish you the best.
Yeah, see you soon. Thanks for giving us money to make this thing. So if you enjoyed that, there are 4 more episodes of What the Trans Nights that will be available very shortly on our Patreon for our backers, and you can access those 6 months before everyone else if you become one of our backers for $7 or more. I don't know why it's dollars. Patreon is weird. We are British. We do the pound and pennies and farthings and other things, I assume. But I want to point out that we do not paywall content. No judgment on others that do so. We all have to make a living in this capitalist hellscape, but that was a decision that me and Ashley made about What the Trans very, very early on when it became clear that we were developing a sizable audience that would be wonderful enough to start throwing money at us. And we intend to stick to this promise. So all episodes of What the Trans Nights will be published to this feed eventually. But if you cannot wait to hear more of me oversharing and Ashley sharing what I can only assume is the expected amount, head over to patreon.com/whatthetrans and back us for $7 or more. I don't know why Patreon is all about the dollars. But yes, next week we'll return to all of the terrible news and educational meats that you are used to, but until then, it's a very, very important week. It is the census. And for those that don't know, the census is basically where the Office of National Statistics counts everyone. And this will be the first time in the history of the census where trans people will have a question around gender identity and will be able to fill in and will essentially be able to tell people that they are trans. And this is very, very important for a number of reasons. In the future, the government will be legislating and acting around these numbers. Different research departments in various places all over the place will be using this information for a whole range of things. Currently, in the UK, the estimate of how many trans people there are is 200,000 to 500,000. That's based off a projection by the Office of National Statistics, which is a very posh way of saying it's a guess. It's just a bit of a guess. And those numbers, I don't believe that they included non-binary people in that, so I think that number is going to be very low. Now we may actually have some idea of how many of us there are. And that kind of knowledge is going to be so important for so many different things. So go into the description of this podcast and check all the information in there. I'm going to write a whole thing on what you need to do, how you need to fill it in, all of that stuff if you are completely unaware. You should have all received some kind of package from the government or from the Office of National Statistics at some point, but just in case you have missed it, I'm going to basically put everything that I can find in there to make sure that everyone who is able to and is safe to can fill in the census and let everyone know that they are a trans person of some kind, so we can have an idea of how many of us there are, because we don't know how many of us there are. Honestly, that's probably more important than what is essentially a big massive advert for one of our tiers for Patreon, to be fair. So, if you don't want to subscribe to us, if you don't want to pay us any money, that's fine. We don't want money from people who don't want to give it. But please, please, please make sure that you fill in the census and you fill it in the gender identity question so we can know how many of us there are. But for now, thanks for listening to this, and see you next week for news and things. Goodbye! This episode of What the Trans was produced and everything else by Ashley Tolbert and myself, Michelle Snow, and was edited by myself. I would like to thank all of our patrons for making all of this stuff possible. Nick Duffy, CB Bailey, Gordon Cameron, Peter Kimball, Rachel T.S., Connie Turner, Vic Parsons, Joel Lewis, Tila Wild, Atom James, Vanessa Billington, Tower Watch, Rowan Littlejohns, Desiree Markland, Patreon user. Who are you, Patreon user? And, don't tell me because you clearly made a choice. Derek Victor, Sarah Bedful of Dogs Halliwell, Emma Doyle, Mike Dickinson, Owen Willis, Catherine, Mina, Elliot McVeigh, Cassius Adair, Tuck, Melissa Brooks, Ian Coomber, Maddie Bell, Karakan 12, April Heller, Sophie Lewis, who has been following the pod since the beginning of time. Sophie, you're great. Alexander Lilly, Claire Scott, Ariadne Pena, Lauren O'Nions, Mara Reynolds, Bernard's Pink Jelly Bean, and Lanos. Thank you all so much for subscribing and backing. Have a good week. Bye bye.